Welcome everyone to our presentation. I am Kerri Wall. My colleague Kady Hunter and I work for Interior Health in the Healthy Communities program, and we are pleased you chose to attend this session on municipal climate resilience. We would like to have one participant from this session to share a 1-minute session highlights report at the closing plenary today from 3:45 to 4:05 p.m. Pacific time. So please type in the chat if you're available to volunteer for that little 1-minute report back from this session. And we'll make sure that that gets passed along. So Interior Health spans a very large region, as I'm sure you know, the ancestral and unceded territories of many Indigenous peoples, as you can read on this slide. Today, I happen to be joining you from Treaty 6 territory. However, my usual home is located in the heart of Amakas Tunaha, in an area the Tunaha call Raven's Land in Fernie. Kady is on the converging territories of the Snakes, the Tunaha, and the Silks peoples. So I invite you all to type in the chat what traditional territories you are from originally and or what traditional territories you are participating from today. It's nice for us to get a chance to acknowledge that to each other and to ourselves. Some of us might be located on treaty land, which is basically ceded or unceded, hard to say sometimes. Those of us located on treaty land, we could find out more about the treaty and whether the land was actually signed away or if the intent of the treaty was to share the territory for mutual benefit. I see we've got somebody here from Treaty 7 territory. That's fantastic. I'm not familiar with those nation names, but I'm glad that Jim is. Some other folks typing in here about where they're living, where they're from, where they're joining us from. Thank you so much. Shuswap Nation, the traditional lands of Shukwepen, Tunaha, Snakes. Lovely. Okay. So we are pleased you have joined us today and chosen to think together about the intersections of health and climate change. Here is an outline of our presentation, which includes at the end an interactive activity. And I see some people are continuing to type in the chat box. Please feel free. Okay, we're going to start with some introductions right off the bat. We're going to do some smaller groups of breakout rooms. And I want you each to take a turn to share with the others in your room your answers to these 3 questions. What is your name? What organization, if any, are you representing? And what are 3 words that are true for you when it comes to climate change or climate action? I've included a few examples on this slide, like my children's future or humans have solutions, something like that from your own perspective. So I think there'll probably be about 8 people in each breakout room. And you'll just have about 1 minute each to respond to the 3 questions, just a quick round of introductions. And I think we're gonna go to those breakout rooms now.
All right, I'll open up the rooms.
Thank you, here we go.
Carry on. So moving into more of the content of our presentation, we just wanted to start by setting the stage for what a healthy community really is and what it means to us. So a healthy community is forward-thinking, where planning and policy decisions both address our current challenges as well as building resiliency for future challenges. In a healthy community, everyone has the opportunity and resources to reach their greatest health potential, and the determinants of health contribute positively to health and well-being instead of acting as a barrier. So what are those determinants of health? Using this framework, you can see that people are at the center with the factors that are intrinsic to them as individuals, like their age, their sex, and other hereditary factors. And then they're surrounded by the other factors that influence them, like their natural and built environments, as well as their social and economic environments. So this includes things like our housing, where we work, our education, our social support networks, and income distribution in our community, which collectively actually have a larger impact on our health than our genetics or our behaviors or our healthcare system. So then you can see in this framework here, there are larger systemic forces like the global economy, politics, and climate change, all which influence the determinants of health. So I really like this framework because it shows how climate change kind of has that overarching influence on the other determinants of health. So what can we expect with climate change and how will it impact our communities? I know this is probably just a refresher for everyone here in this meeting, but in general, with data and projections, we're expecting summers will be hotter and drier with more extreme hot days, more droughts and fires, and falls, winters, and springs will be warmer and wetter with increased rainfall, decrease in our extreme cold days, and earlier snowpack melt and peak flows in our rivers and streams. And then throughout all the seasons, we'll be seeing more extreme weather events. So floods, wildfires, landslides, windstorms. These are events that require immediate action and often make climate change feel most real for people locally and help climate change not feel like just a big global problem. Share a few resources, knowing that you might be interested in seeing that data, what it looks like specifically for your community. So here we have the Plan to Adapt tool from the Pacific Climate Impacts Consortium, as well as the Columbia Basin Climate Source tool if you're living in a community in the basin. So the links between climate change and health are very widely recognized. The Lancet, which is a highly regarded medical journal, has published a quote saying, "A comprehensive response to climate change could be the greatest global health opportunity of the 21st century." You can also see here a pretty poignant quote from the former WHO Director General. So what are we really talking about when we talk about the links between climate change and health? Well, using this visual, you can see how the impacts of climate change impacts those determinants of health we just spoke to, and then how that in turn can impact our community health outcomes. So like we talked about, those determinants of health have a very, very significant impact on our health as a community. So you can see when climate change impacts those determinants, we're likely going to see health outcomes that reflect that. So to go through a few examples, let's say with increased extreme weather events, let's say like a wildfire, that can impact our natural environment. And let's say that's by impacting our air quality, and therefore that can affect our respiratory health. If we see increasing temperatures, that may limit our ability to recreate outdoors, limit our connections to our communities, which may impact our mental health. So those are just kind of some rudimentary links that I hope show you how to work through this visual. But if you can think of any other examples, feel free to share them in the chat box so everyone can get a sense of what those connections might be. So it's very important when we're thinking about these links to think about them through an equity lens. So climate change really disproportionately impacts the health of low-income communities, Indigenous communities, and those with pre-existing health conditions. Many of the same dynamics of race and power that contribute to overall health inequities in our community also contribute to the climate gap, which is really saying that different groups of people are impacted by climate change differently. And so when we're thinking about climate action, we need to really examine who is benefiting, who is being left out, and how can they be included in the solution. I'm loving these examples I'm seeing in the chat box. Thanks, everyone. So before we move on to what climate action really looks like at a local level and how that ties with healthy communities work, I just want to summarize what we've talked about so far. So climate change is harming our health, and it will get worse if we don't take action to protect ourselves. Anyone and everyone's health can be harmed, but those who are being harmed the most are those who are already vulnerable or those who are already facing barriers to those determinants of health. And to end on a positive, we can do something about it. And I'm going to leave it to Kerri to talk to that a bit more.
Thanks, Kady. So those social determinants of health that Kady just mentioned, we all have a role to play in developing those conditions where living in good health is possible. There are all kinds of things that local governments specifically can do to create those conditions. Access to housing, food, green spaces, opportunities for transportation and recreation. These are all key municipal levers for creating healthy communities. Active transportation planning, housing strategies, compact neighborhoods, transit-oriented development. These are all examples of plans and policies necessary for building healthy communities. And what about local government plans and policies necessary for addressing climate change? Notice anything similar about this slide and the last one? They're almost the same. Municipal efforts on climate action will necessarily be creating healthy communities, and vice versa. This is the great double your fun opportunity. We know that reducing vehicle use, for example, is mandatory for cutting greenhouse gas emissions. And providing active transportation options will do exactly that while helping people get more active. So it's a huge win-win. The example I just shared about active transportation fits in this chart here in row 3. Do you see that heart? Active transportation improves human health and well-being. And see the car beside it? Of course, active transportation reduces congestion. There are all kinds of co-benefits, such as improving air quality, and many would say that getting people out of their cars also improves the local economy. There are lots of ideas municipalities and First Nations all over British Columbia are putting into action. Some examples are increased use of cooler outdoor spaces for meetings and programming, shifting to clean energy such as wind and solar, strengthening sustainable local food systems, designating clean air shelters and indoor cooling centers, working with and caring for vulnerable populations, and of course, greening urban areas with trees and parks and natural asset planning. There's all kinds of things that local governments are doing. For an example, right here in the Columbia Basin, let's look at the official community plan for the city of Kimberley from 2018. The city's stated objective for their built environment contains deliberate language related to the changing climate and their desire for higher livability and quality of life in the community. Right there, climate and health are interwoven. Specific policies address shade trees, stormwater, active transportation, energy efficiency, and more. And I want you to note that the word health does not actually appear anywhere in this whole section, yet it is the first thing that Kady and I see when we read this bit on the built environment. So based on those City of Kimberley policies, which we just looked at, and of course that's only one tiny part of their official community plan, here are just some of those co-benefits. Now we want to hear from you again. We've got a few minutes for a brief discussion. Let me look at the time. Maybe about 3 or 4 minutes, maybe 3 to 5 people could share. You can use the raise hand function if you'd like to respond. And also please type your thoughts in the chat as well. So thinking about municipal climate resilience and the co-benefits with health, what have you tried in your community? Or what are others talking about that you could amplify? Or what would you like to try? I'm just going to take a look in the chat. Yeah, anybody can raise their hand or put something in the chat. Anything interesting you've seen some other local governments do, other communities? I know other people are working on things besides the city of Kimberley just because we highlighted them. I know the mayor of Rossland is here and Rossland is doing a great deal.
Yeah, I can talk to a few things. Kerri, do you want me to?
Sure, Kathy, go ahead. I also see there's now a chat, but yeah, go ahead, Kathy, tell us some things.
Well, I mean, you look at this and from Rosalind's point of view, we've tried to do so much. It's kind of, it's too long a list. And we have an active transportation plan, which we've completed most of the trails that we set out to do. We're looking to do a commuter trail between Rosalind down to Trail that's going to be for electric bikes. So we try and get people off the road with their electric bikes and commute down to Tech or IH or wherever they're going. You know, we're right in the middle or just starting a review of our OCP. Our OCP was fairly progressive when it was done in 2008. Now we're redoing it. We're going to have a climate lens on that, and that really helps. But it's just, you know, there's just so much. You know, we have policies that we use at the city to get our employees to buy electric bikes. We give incentives for them to do that. You know, adopting our plastic bag bylaw at long last on Monday. So
yeah, congratulations.
But I'll let somebody else take on.
Thanks, Kathy. And a message in the chat box from Daphne said, I'd be interested in knowing if any municipalities have analyzed municipal budgets and how they target these pieces. I don't know if anybody wants to speak to that, but that's an interesting comment from Daphne. And Sarah Breen has said, I'd love to hear how organizations decided what to do and where to start. That's actually a great comment too, Sarah, because sometimes there's all kinds of things you want to try or that you could like to try, but where do you start, or where is that sort of like the beginning wedge to sort of get in there? We have time for another comment or two if anybody else wants to share. The intersection between health and climate action is powerful, because sometimes someone will be more, you know, some folks are more open to the one argument than the other, perhaps. And when you look at them both, you can almost get everybody, because there's certainly nobody who says, no, we don't care about health. I don't care about my children's health. So there may be some folks that are harder to change their minds around the climate action pieces, but when you bring health into it, it's an almost irrefutable argument for many. Yeah, and it does start with leadership. Thanks for that, Kathy. I see that in the chat box. Having the right people in place who care about these issues. Absolutely.
Daniela's raised her hand.
Oh, go ahead, Daniela.
Yeah, so I could just, from a local government perspective, I just reiterate back to the question about an analysis of budget. That's not something that we've done, but from our perspective, I guess it's the question is, where does one start? You know, we all are impacted by climate change. So we started with looking at our buildings and reducing our own carbon emissions. So we've installed a lot of solar panels on a lot of our buildings, you know, trying to generate, offset those things there, change out our lighting to upgrade all of our municipal buildings to LEDs from the old fluorescent, things like that. And most recently, we've adopted, or in our strategic plan is to develop a trails master plan, because we're lacking a lot of walking connectivity and that kind of infrastructure. So that's the path that we're going down. But and I'm sure there's 101 other things that we can be doing. The challenge is is trying to manage that budget and have the dollars to put forward the visions and the dreams that council often has.
Thanks, Daniela. Well, maybe we'll move on then. We'll go back to Kady here. Thanks,
everyone. I just want to, because I'm very passionate about it, I just want to speak to Daphne had a question about affordable housing, which I will speak to a little bit in when it comes to extreme weather events. But I just want to say that, yes, that connection with climate change and affordable housing, I think that's where we can really bring in the equity lens. We know that many of the programs related to energy efficient retrofits and those types of programs have been primarily directed at homeowners, but what about renters who could really benefit from reduced heating costs or reduced utility costs? And I think bringing that equity lens in can help bridge the links between climate change and housing. I just really wanted to say that. Now I'll start talking about extreme weather events because it fits too. So we just wanted to go a little bit deeper into the extreme weather events piece to set us up for our case study and activity that we have coming. So let me just go over to change the slides. Again, if we're using that visual to link climate change to the determinants of health, to how that impacts health outcomes, we can see that extreme weather events can have impacts on, first, let's just look at our natural and built environments. So if you think of flooding, how that might contribute to mold growth in homes and buildings, and how that in the long run might lead to respiratory illnesses, or for example, wildfire or smoke pollution can impact both our natural and built environments, contributing to poor air quality, which leads to lung irritation, inflammation, difficulty dealing with respiratory infections. I don't know if you've ever heard of anything called COVID-19, but that's something there, as well as worsening chronic lung and heart conditions. And then when we look at how extreme weather events impact our community and social environments, as well as our economic situations, I really think to what happened to Grand Forks in 2018 with wildfires and floods, where evacuations from homes can really lead to anxiety, loss of social connections, loss of access to services. And then in the long term, they can cause loss of jobs, lots of housing, loss of personal possession, or just financial resources in general, which are so important to our health, and cause anxiety, stress, and difficulty coping with loss for many. And again, with that equity lens, often the people who are already experiencing barriers to health are the ones who are most negatively impacted by extreme weather events. So people with chronic health conditions, people who live alone or are socially isolated, who are homeless or unsheltered, people who are already dealing with stress, anxiety, and depression, and then even people who may require mobility assistance. You can imagine how that can cause problems when you need to evacuate quickly. Oops. So we just really need to consider how our actions to respond and adapt to extreme weather events really address the barriers that these populations are already facing, and so that they aren't left behind in the actions we take. So now to get into a real life example, we have my colleague Jenny Green, as well as Daniela from the Village of Ashcroft here to speak a little bit about how the Village of Ashcroft implemented a heat alert response system. And so they're going to share their learnings and just pay attention because it will play a part in our activity.
Great, thank you so much, Kady. So Daniela and I are happy to be here today to share experiences planning and implementing a heat alert and response system, or HARS for short, in Ashcroft, BC. And we hope to give you some tools and ideas that may assist you and your communities in developing climate adaptation strategies while keeping in mind some of our most at-risk populations and residents. We would like to acknowledge that Daniela and I are currently located on the unceded ancestral and traditional territories of the Nklahkatma and Shuartnik nations. And specifically, we will focus on extreme heat within the context of BC's interior, planning and implementation of HARS and its components, as well as lessons learned within the context of small communities. So why focus on heat in the interior? Well, heat was identified as the leading cause of illness and death from all weather-related hazards in Canada. We know that global temperatures are rising. However, in Canada, they are rising faster than the global average. We are also seeing an increase in the frequency and intensity of extreme heat events. And as temperatures continue to rise, we will expect to see an increase in these events. Next slide. The southern interior is one of the hottest regions in Canada and the hottest region in BC. So this chart represents the maximum temperatures for the month of July for the hottest communities in BC between the years of 2011 and 2018. And the orange lines represent the communities located in the BC's interior, which are some of the hottest communities. Next slide. So how does the heat impact human health? Well, heat affects the cardiovascular and respiratory systems and can present itself as a minor heat rash all the way up to a severe heat stroke and death. And so this graphic outlines who is most vulnerable to heat. Those with underlying health conditions or those who are on certain medications, the elderly, financial and housing insecurity, conditioning, or who do not use their conditioning during extreme heat events, and those who work or recreate outside during peak heat times. I'm just checking. I got a reminder saying that my internet was unstable. Can you all see? Okay, things are still moving. Okay.
You were talking in slow motion for a little bit, but we got you again.
Fantastic. All right, we'll get through this. All right, so to mitigate the effects of increasing temperatures in the region, in 2018, Interior Health undertook the development of a HARS. And so this graphic outlines the major components of HARS, so community engagement and mobilization, developing alert protocols, effective communication strategies, including education for the community, developing a community response plan, and finally evaluating the system. It's important to recognize that implementation of HARS may not look the same in every community, and it's definitely a one-size-does-not-fit-all approach, but I believe that the process and elements associated with developing a HARS may be applied to different weather-related planning processes as well. On the right, just back up.
Right.
No worries, too quick. So on the bottom right is a photo of the HARS toolkit for interior BC communities, and that was published last year. And its purpose is really to provide community partners with practical information and resources to assist them in developing and implementing systems and strategies to respond to extreme heat, especially in rural communities. So I just encourage everyone to take a look at that down the road. Next slide. So developing HARS in the interior region of BC required a different approach, as existing tools and recommendations often target larger urban centers. And these approaches may not be applicable in rural settings where resources and capacities are different. So our HARS planning began with identifying a pilot community, which was Ashcroft, BC. And this community has a population of just over 1,500 people and is located in the Thompson-Cariboo region, as shown on the map. And so why Ashcroft? And as you saw earlier, it's one of the hottest communities in the interior with a dry and semi-arid climate. Interior Health has well-established working relationships with the community, and the village staff and council were enthusiastic to participate in the project, especially given their high number of seniors. Next slide. So Interior Health collaborated with the village and community to introduce HARS using a community-driven, assets-based approach. And this involved developing a multi-sectoral community stakeholder committee to help guide the project. And it was comprised of local and regional government partners. So that looked like folks from the village, regional district, EMBC, and public health representatives, community members and organizations such as nonprofits, volunteer coordinators, fire, paramedics, and police, as well as surrounding First Nation band members. The community engagement sessions were hosted with stakeholders to share information about extreme heat and its effects and how to mitigate the impact, as well as to identify populations within the community that are vulnerable to heat and discuss the unique context of the community, including existing assets that could help prepare for extreme heat events. Next slide. Ashcroft uses existing heat alert thresholds established by Environment and Climate Change Canada and the BC Centre for Disease Control. And these are based on findings from a heat health analysis and community and region-specific weather conditions. And this information can be found online at Environment Canada. The community response plan for Ashcroft is simple and concise and focuses on the community's unique context as requested by community members, utilizing existing partnerships, physical and communication infrastructure to support the community and individuals to take actions that protect against extreme heat. Next slide. And educational materials that encourage individuals to take action against extreme heat was identified as the most effective means to mitigate risk in a community with limited resources. And Daniela will speak more about Ashcroft's response plan and communications shortly. And lastly, a post-heat season engagement with the village and stakeholder committee occurred last year to discuss how the community response plan rolled out and to gather initial feedback about its utility. And we intend to do ongoing evaluation. So now I'll hand it over to Daniela, who will walk us through what implementation of HARS looks like in Ashcroft.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So HARS in Ashcroft is, I came into the program when the program was just about fully developed under Michelle Allen, the previous CAO's direction. And I think the last issue to discuss that they were still kind of finalizing was what constitutes a heat. When do we have an extreme heat event in Ashcroft? And that was setting the temperatures. And I'll get to that in a little bit. So program rollout is, we tried to keep it as simple as possible so that it didn't become time consuming because we're limited. We have limited resources in the office and we want it to be an easily manageable program. So in 2019 was the first year that we had all of our advisories in place, and we were ready to go, and Michelle was still here prior to her retirement. And you know what, the weather just was wonderful. We didn't have any events at all recorded that year. We were close a couple of times. We had alerts come through. So all we did for that initial year was send out a pre-season advisory, just reminding people that the warm weather is coming and start building that awareness. In 2020, things changed significantly for us. Again, we did all of the preparation work of how are we going to roll out, update all of our slides and advisories and alerts. And last year, as everyone else is aware, we had to develop safety protocols for COVID-19. So generally, one of the things that we do in our program is we have cooling centers. So with COVID-19 and the restriction of being able to put people close together, we weren't able to open those cooling centers. So we had to really make sure that residents in Ashcroft were prepared and had other alternate plans so that if we did have an extreme heat weather event, there were other places for them to go to cool off to be safe. So we prepared all of our advisories and our heat advisory levels and alerts, and we're ready to move forward. At the time, we had a young lady as an intern, and she came with an environmental science background. Her name was Amy O'Rourke, and she did a fabulous job preparing the extreme heat advisory level that you see on the screen, and just make them into small brochure style pamphlets that we could disperse throughout the community. So what we did do is send out a mass mail out to every resident in Ashcroft, as well as blasted it on social media, on the bulletin boards, and we posted to the website. Next slide, please. So heat triggers that I mentioned earlier were 35 degrees. We need 2 days or more of 35-degree temperature or higher, with an overnight temperature of not lower than 18 degrees. So Ashcroft, if you've been here, is in the valley right along the Thompson River, and we are surrounded by beautiful landscape, rocks and sand and desert-like semi-arid scenery. And once those rocks get hot, they stay hot. So heat can be a really serious issue here. Next slide, please. One of the things that we did do, we implemented on our, this is a corner snapshot of our village website, our homepage, and under emergency services, we added a link for extreme heat. When you, during an event or any time throughout the year, but especially during an event, you click on the extreme heat, and whatever advisory or alert is in place pops up with all kinds of links below it that will direct the viewer to resources for managing their own health during an extreme heat event. Next slide, please. So ongoing implementation of the HARS, it begins every year with a pre-season preparation where 2 or 3 of us in the office get together and we just pull all of the information that we have and we review it. This year is going to include a review and update of our COVID-19 protocols that we have in place for safety, and really reconsider whether 2021 we will be able to have cooling centers. At this point, it's a no. If public health orders change, then we will look at it. In 2020, we added a disclaimer to the bottom of our publications that notify the recipient that there are no cooling centers due to COVID-19. So we review the public heat alert and notices, and we update them with the current year and such. And the new thing that we've implemented over the past year is we've signed on to the Voyant Alert system, which is a mass notification system. And we've included heat alert as one of our notices that we send out. What we really like about this is when we do a mass mail out or a social media blast, because a heat event is coming, we don't necessarily reach all of the community. Through the Voyant Alert, we really feel confident that we'll be able to reach much more of the community in as many media forms as possible. There's option for cell phone calling, texting, there's landline, voice contact for we have an aging demographic, so a lot of our seniors don't have computer capacity. So that was the alternative that we've come up with, and we're at the rollout stage of that program now, where we're really encouraging our residents to sign up so that during the summer months and where our heat events can happen, that we'll be able to engage with our residents much quicker. Next slide, please. So last year Amy was really creative. We wanted to really do a public education piece around extreme heat as well as water conservation. And we thought, well, our extreme heat notification brochure was one-sided. Let's double-side it and put some water conservation on the back. And we mailed out what you see on the screen now. It was also distributed on Twitter and Facebook and on bulletin boards, as well as our website. The brochures, we printed a whole pile of the brochures as well, and we distributed them at what we call a hub. It's lack of better words, a community center, and the pool, the museum, the village office, and we shared them on social media. So I think public education and really building that awareness is probably the key to the success of the program. Next steps for Ashcroft. The image that you see in the slide is a misting station, which is Amy's idea. She says, she thought that strategically placing 2 or 3 of these throughout the community would be a really good alternative way for people to enjoy the outdoors when it was hot and still have an opportunity to cool off when necessary. So she looked into purchasing them, and they are on our budget to purchase. However, due to HARS shipping where they're coming from, we're not able to receive them right now. And so that it's on our radar to purchase and install those. We'll continue to roll out the Buoyant Alert, annual reviews and updates and notifications, and just review our progress and how are we reaching our community. We have some new staff members that require some training and really bringing them on board with the program so that they understand it. So when phone calls come in, people are concerned, they're able to answer those questions. The misting stations we hope to have installed by the end of the year, if at all possible. And of course, we're happy to continue to work with IHA. And next steps continue to, and lastly, we will continue to engage with the community, continuing to send out our public notices and including heat alerts and just information, little mini articles on our newsletters, website, social media, and really looking at COVID and alternatives for cooling centers for this year. Lessons learned for Ashcroft is our plan needs to be simple and easy to use. If we've got something that's complicated, it's going to, more than likely get shoved to the side, and we won't be wanting to use it as much. Community is playing an important role, in preventing the related illnesses and death through coordinated planning and action. And considerations for developing HARS in rural communities, exposure to heat and stress. I won't read the slides for you, but the things that we do that we've learned is that cooling centers and cool outdoor areas are important, and ultimately community engagement and public education, and just to continue to provide that information. So thank you. I'll turn it back to Jenny.
Great. And for next steps for Interior Health, we will continue to support Ashcroft with HARS implementation and evaluation pieces. We have been and will continue to invite other rural communities to develop HARS and educate the public about the extreme heat health impacts and short and long-term adaptation strategies. A lot of that information you can actually see in the HARS toolkit. So that's really great, a great reference. And also pursue stronger engagement with our Aboriginal communities around this work. And with that, next slide. And so the project was funded by the Heat Division of Health Canada and supported by Environment Canada, BC Centre for Disease Control, and several Interior Health departments. And I would just like to say thank you for listening, and I'll turn it back to Kady and Kerri.
Thanks so much, Jenny and Daniela. I think that you just really set us up so well to think about how this could be applied in our communities, and set us so well to think about how it could be applied specifically related to air quality and smoke in our communities. So that's what we're going to do next. We thought it'd be interesting to brainstorm how those 5 key steps outlined in the HARS toolkit might be applied in times when air quality is poor. So the province is currently issuing smoky skies bulletins when there's areas that are being impacted by smoke or have the reasonable potential to be impacted by smoke within 24 to 48 hours. So we are wondering if these could be used to initiate a community response, and what would that look like? So we're kind of using you as testers for this idea. We're going to all go back to our breakout rooms from the beginning of the session. There might be a little bit of shuffling around as people join later on, but in those groups, you'll have a facilitator, and you'll be going through the 5 steps of the HARS toolkit, like I mentioned, and be identifying stakeholders or processes that might be part of a air quality or smoke response in a rural community. We know that in your groups, you're going to be mixed communities, so you probably won't be able to identify specific stakeholders. So just try and think about what sector or what bucket that stakeholder might fit within. So maybe instead of naming a specific church, you could say our local church, or our rec center, the Chamber of Commerce, and just trying to think about it a little bit more broadly that way. Just looking at time, I think we can do 25 minutes in the breakout session, which, yeah, that will set us up well. 25 minutes. I believe you'll get a 2-minute warning. Lisa can confirm that.
That's
but
correct.
A 2-minute warning to return back to the main meeting. If you have to leave the breakout room at any time but still want to remain part of the meeting, you'll have the option to leave breakout room to come back to the main meeting. If you want to just leave us all together, you can leave the meeting, but I just want to alert you there will be those 2 options there. Yeah, so it'll be Kerri, Jenny, and myself facilitating in 3 breakout rooms. And if there's no questions here, I think we can go into our sessions.
Okay, so I hope that was interesting for you. Thank you for participating in something new that could benefit municipalities going forward. We have just a couple of minutes for feedback before we close. So please feel free to type in the chat box if you learned anything from that process in the breakout rooms, or if you had any aha moments. We're particularly curious to know if you think that it might make sense to use a process like this in your communities to plan for smoke events.
Yeah, and just while everyone else is typing, I don't know if you guys can see it, so I just want to share that Kathy shared in the chat box that she really liked the HEAT program and can see its benefit for smoky day alerts, and also sees that it will take some work to make it happen. And Sue mentioned that communication is key to making sure that all groups, including the homeless, those who are tech challenged, are included in the rollout.
That's great. Oh, good. And Lindsay here has added, one of her key learnings was needing to understand how information is collected and disseminated so that we can ensure consistency and teamwork. That sounds really important. I agree with that. In my breakout room, we did also talk quite a bit about seniors being less tech savvy. You know, how do they get information? How do we get information to vulnerable people, not just seniors? Some seniors are more or less vulnerable, but especially those people who may not have consistent access to technology. Or who may be more vulnerable due to other barriers or their own sort of respiratory problems, that kind of thing. Oh yeah, and Port Alberni is actually a hotter community, even though it's on the coast because of their more interior location. We did have some talk too about the sort of over the border smoke from last year when we weren't having a wildfire season that was remarkable in terms of what we've had over recent years. In BC, we were not, but they were in Oregon, Washington, California. And so, you know, that smoke knows no borders. So even if it looks like it's not a wildfire season here, we will likely have smoke to deal with. Oh yeah, Kathy says, it was awful. Let's build a wall. Okay, please continue to put some chats right in there if you like. I'm going to wrap us up here pretty quick. We'll go to the next slide. Thank you for joining us today to explore the co-benefits of healthy communities and climate action. We hope your key takeaways include the close link between climate change and health, an understanding of the many levers local governments have to take climate action, and that they are the same levers that can be used to support healthy communities. And also that coordinated community plans for extreme weather events can be created in rural communities and they can have important health impacts. Leslie did put in her little aha moment near the end. She said, I realized that all the questions were directing us to which organizations should be or could be or would be responsible to manage and communicate the challenges and solutions. I think COVID demonstrated that our first line of support is our neighbors. How do we empower and strengthen neighborhoods to be the primary responders? That's great. In fact, I'm pretty sure Stacy Barter is talking about it in her session tomorrow. Yeah, Katie's nodding. That's a wonderful insight, Leslie. I'm glad you said that. Oh yeah, and your group spoke about that too, Katie. Fantastic. Again, I'm not sure, Lisa, if anybody's mentioned or messaged you to have a volunteer to speak about this session at the closing plenary, but I hope everybody can make it to the plenary. Kady, did you have any other closing thoughts?
No, I just want to thank everyone for your enthusiastic participation in all our activities. That was really appreciated. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lisa, for your tech help.
My pleasure.